Hey friends, you've probably been in the situation that all your Playwright tests are green, even though your JavaScript is erroring out and is throwing exceptions. In this video, I want to show you how you can leverage Playwright fixtures to notice and fail your test cases when your frontend is blowing up. Sounds good? Let's get to it. I have a Playwright test case here that we run against our own ChecklyHQ blog. Currently, it's running against my local environment at localhost 3000. It's locating all the links included in the page. It's counting all these article links. Then it's scrolling the last one into view. And then I'm using Playwright's fancy toPass method to figure out if there are more article links in the page. So we're lazy loading all the articles in, and this test case pretty much makes sure that this isn't broken. So when I now run npx playwright test, we will see that this test works properly and we have a succeeding test result. There's only one problem with this. When I go to localhost 3000 blog here and I can scroll around, you will see that, well, actually this page right now is throwing a JavaScript exception. And it doesn't really matter if the lazy loading works. If the JavaScript is blowing up, my test case should notice that and tell me that something is off with the page. So how could we test for this JavaScript exception? What you always can do is you can use the page object and you can add an event listener and listen for page error events. Then you can define a callback like we do here, and the callback will be called with an error object that we then can do things with. I will push it into an errors array that I don't have yet, but we will initialize that in a moment. So when we now go here, we can say const errors, and we're dealing TypeScript here. So I have to do array and tell it that we want to deal with errors. And right now it is an empty array. And what we're now doing is that when we're navigating the page and when we are instructing Playwright to do and interact with our applications, we're just silently collecting all these page errors in the page and we're pushing them to this errors array. Now, when the test case is done, we can check if this array still has the length of 0 because we don't want to have JavaScript exceptions in the page. So when I now do expect errors to have length 0, we are now able to catch JavaScript exceptions and check that there were no errors in the page. When I now run this test case again with npx playwright test, you will see that, well, so far so good. I can now be sure that there are no JavaScript exceptions in the page because Playwright figured it out and is watching for these exceptions. But when we now look at this test case, you might recognize that this way of tracking JavaScript exceptions is not the most scalable way. Because right now we have this functionality bound to this particular test case. So how could we reuse this way of tracking JavaScript exceptions across all our test cases? And this is a perfect use case for fixtures in Playwright. Fixtures allow you to equip all your test cases with whatever they need to run. And when we have a look here at our test case, the page object that is provided here to our test case is a Playwright provided fixture itself. If you want to learn more about fixtures, we have an entire video on the channel, so check the description if you want to learn more about the details of Playwright fixtures. What we could do in our case here is we could override the page object that is provided by Playwright to every test case and add this functionality that we have here at the beginning and at the end of our test case and apply it to all the other different test cases. So how could we do this? First, we have to change the expect and test that are coming from Playwright itself. So I will change the import statement here to use expect and test from a file that I already have here. So we have here a base TS file and it's importing test and expect from Playwright. So test becomes base, expect is still expect, and we're exporting right away expect from Playwright to be used over here. And with this setup, nothing particularly changed, but note that we are exporting a test object that is basically an extension of the test object that is coming from Playwright itself. And by providing an object and extending the test function from Playwright, what we can do is we can define custom fixtures. And you see here already that I defined a new custom fixture that is overriding the Playwright page object. So when I now go in here, you will find that there will be a use function, and whatever you pass into the use function will be popping up here when a test wants to use your fixture. So let's call use with Playwright's page object, And now we pretty much have a base setup to extend the standard functionality that comes with Playwright. So whenever now a test case is requiring or is using the page object in the function definition, it will use our extended Playwright version. And what we're doing here is we're overriding Playwright's provided page fixture with our own. And now we can add functionality that runs before and after our test case. So when we now go here, what we can do is we can take all this event and error listening and run it before the test case is executed. And for our exception here, we can do the same thing and we can move it over. And we can now fail this test case if there were any JavaScript exceptions. So this means when we now go back and we run this code, we should have a similar result, but all test cases that now use the page fixture will have automatic JavaScript error tracking out of the box. But what if you have some test cases that shouldn't fail if they are JavaScript errors? For this use case, what we can do is we can make our custom page fixture configurable. Let me go into the extend call and introduce a new fail on JS error property. And this now accepts an array. And here we give it a default value. And we also provide an options object that marks this fixture value here as an option. So what happens now? Let me just quickly make TypeScript happy. So we define here that fail on JS error will be a Boolean. So what we just introduced is a fixture option that we can then use in our own custom fixture. So when I grab now fail on JS error, which defaults to true, I can wrap our assertion here at the end and can say if fail on JS error, then please fail this test case. So when I now run this test, we should still have a failing test case because fail on JS error is defaulting to a truthy value. And indeed, we have here our failed test case. But now that we introduced a fixture option, what we can do is we can go into our test case and we can say test use. And here we want to say fail on JS error equals to false. So when we now rerun this test case, you will see that now this test case is passing because we introduced a new fixture option that allows us to control everything depending on the test cases, depending on the project. And this also means that if I would want to go, for example, into my general Playwright config, I could also go in here and I could say, for these test cases, I don't want these test cases to fail if there is a JavaScript exception. So, and I think this is just a very, very handy way to configure your Playwright test cases. To summarize, Playwright fixtures allow you to run code before and after your test case is executed. And by overriding the page object as we did here, it's just a handy way to extend the base Playwright functionality with your own setup and cleanup actions, depending on what your project needs. And all your custom fixtures can then be configured by fixture options. As we defined here, we had fail on JS error defined to true to make all our fixture behavior that is outside of our test cases configurable. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and always remember, if you're using Playwright to test your apps and sites, you might want to start monitoring your sites with Playwright and Checkly too. And this was this week's Playwright tip, and I will talk to you very, very soon again.